Emma's world crumbled around her as Jacob's discovery unfolded. His girlfriend Rowena had secretly tried on Emma's wedding dress, leading to a terrible accident. During their fight, pregnant Rowena fell badly. At the hospital, doctors delivered the crushing news: Rowena could never have children again. Burning with rage, Jacob shipped Emma off to a distant convent, forcing her to become a nun. The year passed slowly. When Jacob finally came to collect her, he was shocked to find Emma had escaped, and even more shocked to see her holding a baby with striking red eyes. "What game are you playing?" Jacob sneered. "Trying to trap me into marriage with this child? Or are you just rubbing salt in Rowena's wounds because she can't have babies now?" Little did Jacob know that the baby wasn't his, and Emma was about to marry someone else. A year had slipped by since then. Emma stood tall despite Jacob's unchanged arrogance. She kept her feelings locked away, giving him just a quick glance with her bright eyes. "You've gotten everything wrong," Emma said quietly. Jacob's eyes remained cold, his voice dripping with mockery. "I see your difficult personality hasn't improved at all. Someone like you could never fit into our family." Just then, baby Mason started crying loudly, cutting Jacob's lecture short. His face softened briefly as he looked at the 1-month-old, his hand moving as if to take the baby. But before he could, a soft voice called from behind them. Jacob froze, his attention immediately drawn to the sound. Rowena appeared, walking toward them with measured steps. Her face darkened when she spotted Emma and Mason, but she quickly wrapped herself around Jacob's arm possessively. "Jacob, I didn't know you were visiting Emma," Rowena said sweetly. "Should I leave you two alone?" "Absolutely not," Jacob jumped to explain. "She's had a whole year to think about her behavior. I'm sure she's not as childish anymore." He studied Emma's face, looking for a reaction. Emma only offered a faint smile. "Don't worry about interrupting. If anyone doesn't belong here, it's me. I'll go now." She turned to leave, but Jacob grabbed her wrist roughly. "I just said you weren't childish anymore, but you're still exactly the same," he snapped. "I expected better from you." In the past, his obvious preference for Rowena would have crushed Emma's heart. But now, she simply pulled her hand away from his grip. "I need to catch my flight," was all she said. "Have a good time, both of you," Emma said quietly as she turned to leave. After returning home, Emma had pressing matters to handle, but when she headed to the airport with little Mason, she discovered Jacob and Rowena had booked tickets on the same flight. During boarding, Mason started crying hungrily, prompting Emma to rush toward the nursing room. Before she could reach it, Rowena stepped in her path, arms outstretched. "Why can't you quiet him down?" Rowena asked, her voice sweet but eyes sharp. "Poor Mason has been crying nonstop. Let me try to soothe him." Emma stepped back protectively, clutching Mason close to her chest. "Mason has asthma," she explained carefully. "I need to care for him myself." To Emma's shock, Rowena's eyes welled up with tears. She dabbed at them dramatically, making sure nearby passengers noticed. Will Emma finally stand up to Jacob and Rowena? What will happen when they all board the same flight? And who is Alexander, the mysterious man who rescued Emma from the convent? If you're feeling your blood boil watching Jacob treat Emma this way, hit that like button right now. The truth is, Emma has a secret that will turn Jacob's world upside down. Her baby isn't even his. And that's just the beginning of the surprises coming Jacob's way. Emma's about to show everyone who's really in control, and trust me, you don't want to miss the moment when Jacob finally realizes what he's lost forever. Subscribe now to see Jacob's face when he discovers Emma is marrying his own brother. The revenge she's planning will leave you speechless. And if you're loving Emma's quiet strength, share this video with someone who needs to see what real power looks like. Sometimes the quietest revenge is the sweetest. Comment below if you think Jacob deserves what's coming to him, or if you think Emma should have handled things differently. Now, let's get back to the story. Emma boards the plane with little Mason, But when her baby starts crying, "I can't have my own children anymore," Rowena sobbed. "I don't blame you for causing my miscarriage, but can't I just hold the baby for a moment?" Her performance caught everyone's attention. Other passengers began whispering, shooting disapproving glances at Emma. Jacob hurried over, his face hard with judgment. "Jessica, what's the problem with letting Rowena hold the baby?" Jacob demanded. "What has she done to make you so cruel? I think you were raised poorly." Something snapped inside Emma. She met Jacob's gaze firmly, her voice steady. "Mason is my child. Rowena had a miscarriage. Why are you blaming me for that?" Before Jacob could launch into another lecture, several women from nearby seats spoke up. "We've been listening this whole time," one woman said. "So you're playing victim just to steal someone else's baby? How shameless." "Crying to take a child right in front of everyone," another added. "How embarrassing." Rowena's face flushed with shame. Jacob stepped forward, puffing up his chest. "I'm the child's father. This is family business." A passenger in the row ahead turned around with a scoff. "You? A father? Helping another woman steal a child? What kind of man does that?" She shook her head in disgust. "Don't ever take this flight again. Seeing you two together is bad luck." Jacob stood frozen in shock. He'd never faced public criticism before. His chest rose and fell rapidly as words failed him. Rowena, even more furious, gritted her teeth as tears streamed down her face. With a choked sob, she ran toward the bathroom. Emma tried again to enter the nursing room, but Jacob blocked the doorknob with his hand. His voice came out ice cold as he turned to the nearby flight attendant. "There are plenty of passengers with children who need the nursing room," Jacob told the flight attendant coldly. "But Ms. Jessica doesn't need it." The flight attendant looked unsure what to do. Jacob was a platinum card holder, which made it hard for her to refuse him. But the other passengers weren't intimidated by his status. Someone tossed a water bottle that hit Jacob's shoulder. "Is this your private plane?" a voice shouted. "How can you be so unfair? A man like you shouldn't be a father." Jacob didn't dare argue back with so many witnesses. He simply turned his head and signaled the flight attendant to follow his orders. But he still wouldn't move his hand from the door. "I don't need the nursing room right now," Emma said calmly, deciding to back down. The kind woman sitting next to Emma immediately spoke up. "I'll help you. You feed your baby, and I'll file a complaint about this bully and the unhelpful staff." Emma smiled gratefully and returned to her seat. The woman helped shield her with a jacket while she fed Mason. Once fed, the baby stopped crying and slept peacefully until they landed. Outside the airport, Jacob noticed Emma wasn't heading toward his car. His face darkened with anger, assuming she was trying to provoke him. "Jessica, you can take a taxi if you want, but my son can't," Jacob said sharply. "Are you using him to make me feel sorry for you?" Emma looked straight into Jacob's eyes. "Mason isn't your son." Jacob laughed bitterly, as if he'd heard the most ridiculous joke. "I didn't expect this from you, telling such outrageous lies. You've truly lost all sense of decency." Before he could continue, Rowena dramatically shivered and sniffled beside him. Jacob immediately rushed to her side. "Are you cold?" he asked with genuine concern. Without waiting for her answer, he took off his coat and wrapped it around Rowena's shoulders. He quickly opened the car door and helped her into the front seat. When he turned back to Emma, his patience had clearly run out. "If you want to stand here in the cold, then stay here," he snapped, not giving her another glance before speeding away. Minutes later, a different car pulled up. The Hahn family's housekeeper stepped out and helped with Emma's luggage. "Mrs. Hahn, the old master has been so eager to meet his grandson," the housekeeper said warmly. "Please get in." Emma thought back to a year ago when Alexander had rescued her from the convent. They had secretly made vows to each other, though initially old Master Hahn opposed their relationship. But Alexander, as the eldest son, had threatened to end his life if they couldn't be together, forcing his grandfather to accept their union. When we reached the Han mansion, every light was shining bright. Old Master Han gently lifted Mason from my arms, his face glowing with joy. Then he glanced around, looking confused. "Where's Alexander? I thought he'd be back too. We need to talk about the wedding together," the old man said. "Alexander is still busy at the overseas office," I explained. "He asked me to come back to visit you and handle some work at the local branch." Old Master Han nodded slowly, deep in thought. Inside, the whole Han family had gathered to plan a spectacular wedding. Jacob's position was complicated. Being only an illegitimate son meant that while Old Master Han gave him money and a title, Jacob had no real place in the family. Once everything was decided, my aunt, who ran a TV station, announced the news right away. Jacob called immediately, his voice full of disbelief and sarcasm. "Jessica, how dare you plan a wedding with my father without asking me first? I haven't even agreed to this." "Do you honestly think anyone cares what you think?" I replied coldly before hanging up. I ignored his call and walked into Alexander's bedroom at the Han house. The next morning, as I stepped out holding Mason, I bumped into Jacob in the hallway. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. His face went pale and his eyes darkened. "Why were you sleeping in my brother's room?" he asked stiffly. When I didn't answer, Jacob didn't push it. Instead, he sighed heavily. "Since the wedding is happening anyway, I'll go along with your plans. Let's go pick out the wedding dress." I gave Jacob a puzzled look and started to leave, but he grabbed my arm roughly. "Jessica, you're the one getting married, yet you're acting so distant. Do you enjoy hurting me this much? Are you still mad about Rowena? I grew up with her. Her boyfriend left her alone. What's wrong with me looking after her?" I didn't want to keep talking about this, so I answered very clearly. "I think you're confused. I'm not angry at all, not even a little bit." As soon as I said those words, the storm in Jacob's eyes slowly calmed. He reached out as if to take my hand, but when I glanced at it, he let it drop. "I've arranged everything," he said quietly, "and the original wedding dress has been altered back to your size. It's your choice whether you come or not," I said, my eyes lighting up as I quickly agreed to go. The wedding dress that Rowena had secretly altered had been sent to China by Alexander as a wedding gift. Now it carried a story too special to put into words. Getting it back would be an amazing surprise. Just as we were leaving the Han house, Rowena bounced over like an eager rabbit and snuggled up to Jacob. When she noticed me, her fake sweetness was obvious. "I changed Jessica's wedding dress size before, and Jacob scolded me so badly my bottom still hurts," she said with a sugary smile. "But now it's fixed, so you must be happy, right?" Jacob affectionately pinched her nose, his gentleness clear for everyone to see. "Rowena is always the best." Since Rowena was clearly joining us, I sensibly took the back seat. Jacob paused when opening the car door, looking confused by my choice, but said nothing. During the drive, I dozed off, only waking when we reached our destination. Inside the bridal shop, the staff immediately brought out my original wedding dress, as if returning a treasured possession. I checked every detail carefully, making sure everything was back to how it should be. Once I was satisfied, I asked the staff to wrap it up. Jacob had been watching me closely, his expression growing darker. "Jessica, I worked so hard to fix it. Aren't you going to try it on?" he asked, his eyes locked on mine. The staff member hesitated as she handed me the packaged dress. I calmly raised my hand, signaling her to put it away, then replied coldly, "I have other things to do." As I turned to leave, Jacob's face darkened further, the light in his eyes completely disappearing. He started to follow me, but Rowena grabbed his arm and pouted. "Jacob, I want to try on a wedding dress too. Can you stay with me a little longer?" she pleaded. From my taxi, I could still see Jacob's face through the shop window, frozen like a statue, pale and staring blankly, all color drained away. Once the car pulled away, I finally relaxed and closed my eyes. I directed the driver to take me to the city's largest jewelry store to continue my wedding preparations. Alexander had been working so hard, so I decided to pick out our wedding rings to help share his load. Inside the store, a stunning South African blue diamond immediately caught my eye. The diamond caught the light perfectly, sending sparkles dancing across the room. "Miss, you have an excellent eye," the saleswoman complimented me. "It looks absolutely stunning on your hand." I studied it for a moment before nodding with satisfaction. "Please wrap up 2 rings," I told her. Just as I began looking at a special pendant for Mason, I heard familiar voices at the door. How did Jessica know we'd be shopping for rings? Is she following us? Rowena's voice dripped with suspicion. I kept my focus on the jewelry display, not bothering to look up. The saleswoman returned with my packaged rings, but before I could take them, Jacob slapped them from her hands. "What's the hurry?" he sneered. "Just now you acted like you didn't care about the wedding dress. But here you are buying diamond rings. How fake can you be? Are you that desperate to get married?" Rowena quickly bent down to retrieve the fallen package. She opened the ring box and let out an exaggerated gasp. "Jacob, this ring is gorgeous," she cooed. "You and Jessica will look perfect wearing these. But someone like me doesn't deserve something so beautiful." Jacob wrapped Rowena in a sympathetic hug, patting her back gently. Then, without asking anyone's permission, he took out one of the rings and slipped it onto her finger. "It's just a ring," he said dismissively. "Rowena deserves it, of course." I reached out, pretending to grab the ring back. "That's my ring. Who said you could wear it?" Jacob's expression hardened instantly. He pushed my hand away impatiently. "You bought your wedding ring without asking me, and I didn't complain. So what's wrong with letting Rowena try it on? You're being so childish." Rowena put on a show of understanding. She wore the ring briefly, then removed it, but not before secretly bending the band. "I want Jacob to buy me one just like this," she announced. "I don't need this one." With that, she tossed the ring to the floor and began begging Jacob to buy her a new one. I ignored their drama, selecting a necklace and heading to the cashier to pay. The next day, I was already dressed in my wedding gown, making final preparations when Jacob burst backstage. His face was a storm of anger and confusion. "Jessica, is this your way of forcing me to marry you because of what happened with the rings yesterday?" he demanded. "Listen to me. I'm not attending this wedding. You need to think about your behavior before we get married. I don't believe you'll always be this unreasonable." As he finished his rant, the event coordinator who had been reviewing the program schedule raised an eyebrow and double-checked his notes. "Mr. Hahn," he said carefully, "the groom isn't you. The groom is Mr. Alexander," the coordinator clarified. Jacob's eyes grew wide, his face frozen in shock as he stared at me. What does this mean, Jessica? Explain yourself. How is the groom not me but my brother?" I stood calmly in front of the mirror, putting the finishing touches on my makeup. "Since returning home, I never once said I wanted to marry you," I replied evenly. "That was all in your imagination." Taking a deep breath, I rose to my feet, smoothed my dress, and faced the stunned Jacob. "And you just said you weren't going to attend. That's fine. Alexander and I never sent you an invitation anyway. If you can't be happy for us, you should leave now." As I started to walk away, my wedding dress trailing behind me, Jacob suddenly grabbed my arm with such force that it left an angry red mark on my skin. His whole body trembled as he stared at me in disbelief. "Jessica, stop this. I could handle your childish behavior before, but this is about marriage," he hissed. "To force my hand, you're pretending to marry my brother, dragging Alexander into this ridiculous game? Have you lost your mind?" The pain made me jerk my arm free. Without thinking, I slapped Jacob hard across the face. The veins on his forehead bulged instantly. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. So Jacob still thought I had feelings for him? That love had withered away long ago, the moment he locked me in that convent. I rubbed my arm, trying to make the red mark fade quickly, hoping I didn't look too disheveled. Just then, a staff member arrived to escort me to the ceremony. I quickly pulled myself together, glanced at Jacob one final time, and with my maid of honor's support, headed toward the hall. Jacob kept following, trying to stop me, demanding explanations. But Alexander noticed and sent security guards to block the backstage area, preventing Jacob from causing any more trouble. The wedding ceremony was simple and elegant. I took Mason from the nanny and stood proudly beside Alexander, with all eyes on us. Despite trying to appear calm, I couldn't help feeling nervous. Alexander didn't seem worried at all. He held my hand tightly and leaned close to whisper in my ear, "Don't be nervous. After all, you're already my wife." While the scene between Alexander and me radiated warmth and love, I noticed that beyond the Hahn family members who genuinely wished us well, many guests couldn't stop whispering among themselves. The whispers filtered through the crowd like poison. "Jessica switched partners so smoothly, and she even has a child now," someone muttered. "I guess that's how you secure a place in the Hahn family. Isn't that always the way with wealthy families? All these arranged marriages with no real love," another voice added. "For a woman marrying up, does it really matter which brother she ends up with?" These cruel comments spread quickly, freezing what had been a joyful celebration. My face burned with shame as the whispers reached my ears. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, Alexander took the microphone from the host and addressed everyone with quiet confidence. "My brother Jacob is the one who wronged Jessica," he stated firmly. "She endured tremendous suffering. I've done everything in my power to help heal her pain. I'm the one who pursued Jessica, not the other way around." He paused, gazing at Mason with affection. "As for our son, having him was a mutual decision, partly to put my grandfather's mind at ease. If anyone forced this marriage, it was me, not her." After Alexander finished speaking, the gossiping voices fell silent, and the ceremony continued smoothly. But the peace didn't last long. Just as the host began introducing the next segment, Jacob burst onto the stage and grabbed the microphone. Everyone gasped. The atmosphere, which had just started to relax, became unbearably tense again. The air felt thick and hard to breathe. Seeing Jacob's wild expression, Alexander moved protectively in front of me. "I suggest you leave now," he warned in a low voice. "Don't make me force you." Jacob seemed completely blind to everyone around him. He ignored his brother and stared directly at me, his eyes burning with intensity. "Jessica, I'm giving you one last chance," he announced. "Come with me now." The happy mood of the wedding was completely destroyed. I frowned impatiently. "If you're sick, go see a doctor," I told him. "I'm marrying Alexander." Jacob laughed like a madman, as if he'd heard the most hilarious joke in the world. He raised the microphone again, clearly about to make some dramatic announcement. His behavior triggered an immediate reaction from the Hahn family patriarch, who shook with rage. "Jacob, do you see what you've become? Are you still part of this family?" Jacob gave a bitter laugh, tears glistening in his eyes. "Father, you've never considered me part of the Hahn family." At these words, the old man clutched his chest dramatically. He began speaking incoherently, waving frantically at his security team. "Quick, get this disgraceful troublemaker out of here. This is utterly shameful." I rushed to help the elderly man into a chair, patting his back as he struggled to catch his breath. At his command, several bodyguards stormed the stage, grabbed Jacob, and dragged him from the ceremony. For a moment, Alexander looked completely exhausted by his brother's behavior. I gently tugged at his sleeve to bring his attention back to me. Jessica gave a warm smile and gently patted his hand. "Don't worry. Nothing will stop our marriage now that Jacob is out of the picture." The wedding went on smoothly, but the press didn't miss a beat. Headlines soon buzzed about how the Hahn family's second son caused drama at his brother's wedding by trying to steal the bride. Cameras flashed non-stop, capturing every moment. The silver lining to this chaos? Jacob lost his job as president of the subsidiary company. After the ceremony wrapped up, Alexander and I rode back to the Hahn family home for the wedding feast. Mason, our little boy, stole the show completely. Guests showered him with red envelopes filled with money, a traditional wedding gift. Alexander watched with mixed feelings, his voice playful but slightly jealous. Funny how I come back home and nobody gives me any red envelopes, but now that we're married, everyone's rushing to give them all to my son. He sighed dramatically. His comment had everyone laughing, with relatives scrambling to hand him envelopes too. Aunt teased him with a little pout. Looks like Alexander's picked up some smooth talking skills living abroad. I quietly slipped him a red envelope to quiet him down, but Alexander grabbed my hand instead. He whispered mischievously in my ear, "When do you think dinner will end? Having a child doesn't mean we skip our honeymoon, right?" My face turned hot and my heart raced. I pinched his thigh to hold back my laughter, making him yelp, "Ouch!" At the banquet, the mood was festive, though nobody was paying much attention to us as the newlyweds. It seemed like the guests planned to stay forever. Alexander leaned against my shoulder, acting cute for a while before growing restless. He sat up straight, ready to suggest ending the party. Before he could speak, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Jessica, how long will you keep avoiding me?" Jacob had pushed past security and stormed into the hall. The guests exchanged confused looks, unsure what to do. Only the Hahn family's father showed his anger, slamming his fist on the table. Gone was his earlier kindness. "Jacob, if you still see me as your father, leave now. Don't ruin your brother and sister-in-law's wedding." Jacob was furious. "Why should I call her sister-in-law? Is this some kind of joke?" Jacob snapped. Alexander, who had tried to stay calm, now turned deadly serious. His eyes grew dark like storm clouds. "Jacob, it's simple. Jessica and I love each other and we're married. What's with this scene you're making in front of everyone? I don't care if you accept it or not, but from now on, when you see Jessica, you'll call her sister-in-law." Jacob's face twisted. It was hard to tell if he was about to cry or laugh, but the coldness coming from him was clear as ice. Alexander, worried I might be in danger, moved in front of me like a shield. I gently touched his shoulder and stepped forward myself. "Jacob, brother-in-law, I don't understand why you're causing this scene today. At least show some respect in front of all these people. Please calm down." Jacob's eyes were burning red, almost scary to look at. His voice came out rough and broken. "Jessica, does it really have to be this way? Don't you remember all our sweet moments together? Why is it that whenever my brother shows up, you forget everything about us and just marry him without saying a word?" His words bounced right off me now. I gave a small nod and smiled. "The past is the past. It's not right for you to talk like this at our wedding party." As I spoke, Jacob's hands balled into tight fists. Before I knew what was happening, he lunged forward to grab me. The Hahn family father's angry shout stopped him in his tracks. "How dare you!" Alexander grabbed Jacob's arm and pushed him back. "I've been respectful to you. Don't push your luck." Before Jacob could say anything back, Alexander's fist connected with his face, sending him crashing to the floor. Blood trickled from the corner of Jacob's mouth. All the noise woke up Mason, who started crying loudly. Alexander turned to me and said, "Take Mason to the room. I'll handle this." I hesitated for a second before nodding, ready to leave. Suddenly I felt something pulling at my dress. I turned to see Jacob standing there. His face had softened. The wild, broken look from before was gone. "Jessica, please don't leave me. I still love you, truly." I noticed Mason was still crying, and my patience was wearing thin. I looked at Jacob coldly and said, "Brother-in-law." Ignoring Jacob's shocked face, I gave a quick bow goodbye. "What you're saying is completely out of line." I grabbed Mason and hurried away, but behind me the fighting got louder, echoing through the hall. I heard Alexander breathing hard, speaking firmly like the older brother he was. "You want to fight? Fine, I'll fight you." I paused for a moment but figured Alexander would be safe with the Han family father there. By the time I got Mason settled down in our room, I heard sirens wailing outside. Looking out the window, I saw medics loading Jacob into an ambulance. Rowena stood nearby, clutching Alexander's collar and sobbing dramatically. "My poor Jacob! What happened to him? Aren't you supposed to be his big brother? How could you beat him like this?" Alexander showed zero sympathy. He shoved her to the ground and replied coldly, "He brought this on himself. I wouldn't have hit him on my wedding day otherwise." A strange hope flickered in Rowena's eyes. She perked up instantly. "So Jessica really married you? Does this mean Jacob can marry me now?" Alexander just laughed helplessly and ordered someone to close the door. Just then my phone rang. It was a top executive from the subsidiary company, explaining they'd seen the news about Jacob's crazy wedding crash, which was already hurting the company's stock. "Miss Jessica, this is the perfect moment for you to make your move," he said. I watched the ambulance drive away, feeling surprisingly relieved. "I'll leave everything to you, Mr. Sue," I replied. Right after hanging up, I felt strong arms wrap around my waist. Turning around, I found Alexander resting his chin lazily on my shoulder, his voice playful and soft. "Wife, it's all that brat's fault. He ruined our honeymoon night." I couldn't help but laugh as I tried to support his weight, gently pinching his firm cheek. "I feel guilty. I didn't expect him to cause such a mess. It's been quite the headache." I added, "By the way, Sue from the subsidiary called earlier. He thinks we should move quickly with Jacob's resignation. The longer we wait, the worse it gets." But Alexander couldn't care less about business right now. He twirled a lock of my hair between his fingers, moving closer. "Shh. Let me handle everything, okay?" Noticing the romantic mood building, the quiet room seemed to magnify the tension between us. Alexander, a bit tipsy from the wedding, only needed to pull me gently onto the bed. His eyes told me everything. The next moment, his lips were on mine, then moving down my body, leaving me breathless and confused. I grabbed his wandering hand and gave him a serious look. "If you wake up the baby, you'll be the one who has to calm him down." Alexander barely seemed to hear me, but quickly nodded in agreement. Just as things were heating up, Mason's little cries filled the room. Alexander froze, his face showing pure frustration. "This is on you," he complained. "If it weren't for you, the baby would still be asleep." I was about to protest when Alexander silenced me with a quick kiss. He stroked my hair gently and glanced at Mason before looking back at me with soft eyes. "You've had such a long day. Don't worry about a thing. I'll take Mason to the guest room and get him back to sleep. You should rest." After Alexander left with the baby, I slowly drifted off. But the next morning, my aunt burst into my room to wake me. "Jessica, Alexander and Jacob are fighting at the company." I dressed quickly and asked the butler to rush me there. When I arrived, everyone was gathered around the second-floor platform, blocking the way. Jacob's stance showed he'd already heard about the shareholders wanting him to resign. When he saw me enter, his wild behavior stopped instantly. He stared at me in shock. "Jessica, was it you who suggested I step down? I've always been honest with you, and now you're doing this to me?" I frowned, unimpressed by his words. "You're giving me too much credit," I replied coldly. This was between Dad and Alexander. The truth is, you don't have what it takes to be a good CEO. You can't take the Han family to greater heights. Jacob suddenly seemed to crumble, stepping backward with a hurt look. "Jessica, if you want, I can give up everything. The company, everything. Let's get a divorce right now, and I'll marry you. I'll give you all I have. What do you say?" I felt an immediate headache coming on. I moved closer to Alexander and looked him up and down. You should stop using my first name with all these people around. Just call me sister-in-law. It's more proper for our family. Jacob's teeth clenched tight. Hate poured from his eyes as veins popped on his forehead. Before he could speak, a small figure rushed toward us from far away. Jacob! Rowena pushed through the crowd and grabbed Jacob's arm right away. She cried out with big drama. Jacob, this woman isn't worth it. Marry me instead. I'll say yes right now. This sudden marriage proposal from Jacob's former assistant set off whispers among everyone watching. No way. Rowena the assistant and Mr. Han are talking about marriage? I thought they were just having a fling. Well, now both Han brothers are married. What a double celebration. As the older brother, Alexander cleared his throat while watching all this. If you two really want to get married, I'll talk to Dad. And don't worry about social status. I don't think that will be a big problem. When Rowena heard Alexander say this, she nearly jumped with joy. She grabbed Jacob's arm and shook it eagerly. Jacob, since your brother approves, let's hurry and get married. I've been dreaming of marrying you for so long. Slap! With all his might, Jacob hit Rowena across the face. The sound rang through the empty building. Everyone gasped. Rowena's smile disappeared as she stood still like a statue. Jacob? Rowena stared at the man in front of her who showed no love at all. Her pale lips shook. Jacob took a deep breath. His voice was ice cold. When did I ever say I would marry you? I've always loved Jessica. Don't think so highly of yourself. Rowena stood frozen, tears in her eyes. She held her red cheek, her face showing how hurt she was. Jacob, you used to be so nice to me. You always took my side. Why are you saying such cruel things now? What makes her better than me? Jacob laughed with disgust, his lips curling down. You're nothing compared to her. I was only nice to you to make Jessica jealous. And now look, because of you, Jessica has already married someone else. Everyone in the room seemed shocked to hear Jacob curse so openly. Realizing what he'd just admitted, Jacob slowly pulled himself together and turned away. Leave. Don't ever let me see you again. But Rowena, I never thought my usually calm big brother would fight me over a woman. If that's how it is, I'd rather not have you as my brother. Alexander's eyebrow twitched slightly. He turned to look at me, then smiled and answered, Do whatever you want. I just want to be with Jessica. Nothing else matters to me. Alexander stepped back quietly, came to my side and took my hand, kissing it gently. He then glanced at Jacob, who now looked defeated, and nodded to the bodyguards. Getting the signal, they rushed over to surround Jacob and began escorting him out. Mr. Han, please. Jacob's stubborn attitude didn't fade one bit. He pushed his tongue against his cheek, brushed past the bodyguards, and walked out by himself. Meanwhile, the shareholders held a meeting and officially took away Jacob's CEO position. Alexander decided to temporarily take the role, staying in the country to work with me until I could handle the position myself. After the shareholders left the meeting room, many employees were seen rushing out of the building. One of them hurried back to report what was happening. There's been a car accident in front of the company, but the police have already been called. According to witnesses, after Jacob left the company, he ran into Rowena, who had been waiting for him. She begged him again, saying she would marry him, but Jacob was so emotionally broken that he couldn't stand her anymore. During their argument, Jacob pushed Rowena into oncoming traffic. Blood spilled immediately, and people nearby called the police. When we reached the building entrance, we found Jacob sitting still, just watching as paramedics collected Rowena's body. Soon after, police arrived and checked the building's security cameras to figure out what had happened. The police decided they needed to question Jacob further and put handcuffs on him. As they did, Jacob looked my way thoughtfully, then hung his head and didn't look up again. Later, Jacob was charged with manslaughter, but word from the jail suggested his mind was falling apart. If the next mental health check confirmed this, They'd move him to a mental hospital instead. When old Mr. Hahn heard this news, he got so angry he almost had a heart attack. Without hesitation, he announced he was cutting Jacob.